New evidence today of growing Democratic Party woes. A new NBC News poll shows that only 27% of registered voters have a positive view of the party. Its lowest rating in the poll in 35 years. The message? They want their party to fight back harder. On that point, NBC News has learned that House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries met this weekend with Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, who's been facing backlash and questions about his leadership role after not blocking a Republican spending bill.
Do you think that Leader Schumer is the best person to lead your caucus in this moment?
Senator Schumer certainly can lead this caucus.
Is he the best person?
He can lead this caucus, but we need to have a conversation inside the caucus about whether we are willing to stand up to Republicans. The only way that we are going to be effective as a caucus is if we change our tactics.
Let's bring in Jake Sherman, co-founder of Punchbowl News and an MSNBC political contributor, and Basil Smikle, former executive director of the New York State Democratic Party and an MSNBC political analyst. So, Basil, Democratic voters agree with Senator Murphy. Their party needs to change tactics. This is no surprise to you. We've talked about this, but this poll shows 65% of Democrats want party leaders to stick to their positions rather than compromise with President Trump. I mean, look, Chuck Schumer didn't create this problem, but who's going to be the one to deliver what the party is saying? This is what we want.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very tough poll. Let me just off the bat say that. But I think what voters are responding to is that they don't see the fight in Democrats. We've, talked about, you and I have talked about this for quite some time, but this has been an ongoing challenge for the Democratic Party, that they feel that there's too much compromise. And, when you think about the vote that Schumer took on funding the government, but even before that, just think about that 10 Democrats supported a censure of Representative Green, who was removed from the chamber, and then have Representative Boebert say that he was waving a pimp cane. So if that in and of it, that should tell you right then and there that there is no compromise, there is no rationalizing events with Republicans. That's how Democrats feel. And I think there are people who have been speaking to this. There's Representative Crockett from Texas. In the Senate, Chris Murphy's been great. Governors like Hochul and Pritzker and Illinois have been fantastic. Even mayors like the mayor of Baltimore and the mayor of Cleveland, for example. So there are Democrats all over the country that kind of represent the next generation of leadership. And I think what the party needs to do is really allow those voices to shine through even more than they have.
Well, Jake, while Democratic voters might be eager for a fight with Trump, you folks at Punchbowl News report that many more Senate Democrats than just the 9 who voted with Schumer agreed with his ultimate decision. So what's going on here? Are Senate Democrats out of step with voters? Are older Democrats out of step with voters? What's happening as you see it? And look at these, as Basil points out, not great poll numbers for Democrats.
Well, first of all, I don't mean to minimize this because I think Democrats have a lot of real problems, but they have almost no tools to fight with. It's just the reality. When you're in the minority in both chambers, you don't really have a lot of cards to play. I think Schumer's biggest mistake here was giving the indication that he was prepared to have a fight that he would have certainly lost, and then not having that fight. Because the only cudgel he really had, the only weapon he really had was to shut the government down and to not provide those votes for cloture. And I understand that Republicans are in control of the House and Senate. You need 60 votes to do anything in the Senate. Once that bill got through the House, the onus was on Schumer to decide yes or no. And I understand that's a frustrating thing for some people. But he
I feel
thought
like, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I feel like we have talked this in circles since, a couple days before it actually came to it. Voters are saying, show us something. The explanation of the tough decision that Chuck Schumer had to make, even though this poll is not reflective of that because it wasn't, done after that. But there's something else that Democrats seem to be missing here, don't you think?
Yeah, I do. I think the party is leaderless. It doesn't have a central figure for the first time in a long time. The former president, Joe Biden's not a figure. Barack Obama, has been out of the White House for quite some time now. And I think that that's a big problem. And I think also when you're in that position and you have no legislative tools at your disposal and no ability to actually fight back, but the base's desire is to fight back, that's a really difficult position. Let me put it this way. There are basically no wins in the Democrats' future right now. They don't have any big special elections they could win. They have no big legislative fights where they've shown the willingness or the ability to fight. So I think that that's all of those things put together make a pretty grim picture.
So, Basil, Hakeem Jeffries was on this network over the weekend. He's calling for a day of action tomorrow. And look, I think from the time that Joe Biden decided to step down, a lot of Democrats have shown that they are ready to take action. But here the Democratic Party remains, which this may sound like a snarky question, but is a day of action the best they've got?
Well, no. So the day of action is not the best that Democrats have, but it does bring about, I think, a really important point that I've been making, and it leans on Jake's earlier point. There's not a lot that can be done from D.C. because, Democrats don't have the House, they have the Senate. And many would say we don't have the judiciary either, at multiple levels of the judiciary, right? So there aren't a lot of legislative tools, although there have been some victories in the judiciary recently. So a lot of the solutions are going to have to be very, very local. You're going to have Democratic leaders locally saying, who's food insecure, who's housing insecure. These are the policies that Democrats can help support very, hyper locally. Are there folks in your family and in your community who are being deported? Let's create a sort of cadre of lawyers that can actually support some of your neighbors who are going through this process. So that has to be part of the solution. The other part is, I think, a zoom out effect, which is really important and I think gets overlooked. As Jake talked about Barack Obama, if you really think about it, since 2008, when Barack ran, he didn't run really using the party tools. He kind of created a proprietary organization to run and support his candidacy. And then you had years of Bernie Sanders basically calling out the Democratic Party for being too elitist. So for 16, 17 years, you've basically heard that the Democratic Party isn't the community or isn't the party that helps solve the problems of the working class in this country. And that's a really hard thing to spin out of. That's really not an election year solution. It is a multi-year solution that it is going to be difficult, but it really has to evolve through the next generation of voices willing to take on that fight.